Beef eater moves disrespectful tourist. Tourists slowly arrive, holding cameras, guidebooks, and cups of warm tea. They spoke in many languages, their voices mixing into a gentle background sound. At the center of this scene stood a beefeater, dressed in a traditional uniform that carried the weight of history on its deep colors and fine details. He had arrived before sunrise, as he always did. His boots touched the ground with steady confidence, not rushed, not careless. For him, this was not just a job. It was a duty passed down through time, one that required patience, discipline, and respect. He stood tall, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Even when no one seemed to be watching, he followed the same rules. That was part of who he was. The beefeater understood that many visitors saw him as part of the attraction. They wanted photos, short videos, and stories to share later. He accepted this calmly. He had learned that curiosity was natural, especially in a place filled with history. Still, he also knew there were clear boundaries. Some areas were not open to the public. Some behaviors were not acceptable. His role was to protect both the place and the tradition it represented. As the morning light grew brighter, more tourists entered the grounds. Families walked slowly, children pointing at the tall towers and old stones. Couples paused to read signs that explained the history. Some visitors whispered in awe, while others laughed softly, enjoying the moment. The beefeater remained still, like a statue brought to life only by breathing and blinking. His calm presence helped keep order without words. Inside his mind, he reviewed the same reminders he carried every day. Be polite, be firm, stay calm. Respect everyone, but expect respect in return. He knew that most visitors were kind and curious. They wanted to learn, not disturb. Over the years, he had answered many questions, guided lost tourists, and even shared small facts when allowed. He believed that kindness was the best way to teach respect. The uniform he wore was heavy, not just in weight but in meaning. It reminded him that he was representing more than himself. He was representing history, culture, and a promise to protect what had been trusted to him. He had trained for this role, learning how to stay composed even when situations became uncomfortable. He was not there to argue or to seek attention. He was there to maintain order with dignity. As the crowd grew, the air filled with the sound of camera clicks. Some tourists tried to stand closer to him, hoping for a perfect picture. He remained focused, allowing photos but not reacting to silly faces or whispered jokes. He had learned that silence could be powerful. Often just his stillness was enough to remind people to behave properly. The beefeater noticed patterns in human behavior. Early visitors were usually respectful, careful not to disturb the peace. As the day went on, energy increased. Some people became tired, others impatient. This was when his role became more important. He stayed alert, watching quietly, ready to step in if needed. Not with anger, but with authority earned through discipline. He remembered why he chose this path. Years ago, he had admired the beefeaters himself. Their confidence, their calm strength, and their connection to history had inspired him. He wanted to be part of something meaningful, something larger than everyday routine. Standing there now, he felt proud. Even on quiet mornings, the role mattered. Around him, guides gathered groups to explain the past. Voices rose and fell as stories were told. The beefeater listened without turning his head. He had heard these stories many times, yet they never lost their meaning. Each stone, each gate, each rule existed for a reason. His presence helped ensure that the past was honored properly. A few tourists tested boundaries without realizing it. Someone stepped slightly beyond a marked line. Another spoke louder than necessary. In such moments, the beefeater used gentle signals, a small gesture or a calm word. Most people understood immediately and corrected themselves. Respect, he believed, often came from clear communication. He also understood that not everyone knew the rules. Cultural differences played a role. What felt normal in one place could be seen as disrespectful in another. Because of this, he always began with patience. He believed that education was better than embarrassment. His goal was not to shame anyone but to protect the space. As time passed, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Light touched the old walls, making them glow softly. The beefeater remained in position, steady and focused. He could feel the attention of the crowd, yet he did not seek it. His strength came from control, not movement. The atmosphere felt balanced, peaceful, and respectful. Visitors moved along the paths, taking in the sights. Children quieted when parents reminded them where they were. The beefeater watched it all, aware that maintaining this balance was his responsibility. One careless moment could disturb the calm. He took a slow breath, grounding himself. Days like this reminded him why discipline mattered. Tradition was not just about rules, it was about shared respect between people and place. He stood ready, knowing that while most moments passed without issue, his role required constant awareness. Unseen by many, this quiet beginning set the tone for what would come next. The beefeater could not predict who would arrive or how they would behave. All he knew was that he would respond the same way he always did, with calm strength, clear boundaries, and respect for the role he carried. The day had only just begun, and the calm of the morning was about to be tested. As the morning moved toward midday, the number of visitors increased. The once quiet paths were now filled with footsteps, soft chatter, and the sound of phones recording every moment. The beefeater remained in his position, steady and alert. He had already spent hours standing still, yet his focus did not fade. Experience had taught him that changes in behavior often came when crowds grew larger. Among the new arrivals was a tourist who stood out from the beginning. He walked quickly, looking around with excitement that bordered on carelessness. His voice was louder than those around him, and he laughed often, drawing attention to himself. At first, the beefeater simply observed. Many visitors were enthusiastic, and excitement alone was not a problem. Still, something about this man's behavior suggested that he was not paying attention to the rules around him. The tourist stopped near the beefeater and lifted his phone high, speaking directly into it as if performing for an unseen audience. He moved closer than others had, stepping near a clearly marked boundary. The beefeater did not react immediately. He waited, giving the man a chance to notice the signs and adjust his behavior on his own. Most people did once they realized where they were. Instead of stepping back, the tourist continued. He made playful gestures, laughed, and said things meant to entertain those watching his recording. Some nearby visitors looked uncomfortable. A few parents gently pulled their children closer, sensing that the calm of the place was being disturbed. The beefeater's eyes followed the tourist carefully, his expression unchanged. After a moment, the beefeater spoke in a calm, clear voice. He politely asked the tourist to step back behind the marked line and lower his voice. His words were simple and respectful, meant to guide rather than confront. For a brief second, it seemed the situation might end there. The tourist paused, then smiled in a way that suggested he did not take the warning seriously. He nodded quickly but did not move back. Instead, he turned slightly toward his phone again, adding comments that made a few nearby visitors exchange glances. The beefeater remained patient, reminding himself that respect often required repetition. As minutes passed, the tourist's actions became more noticeable. He leaned into restricted space again, trying to capture a closer angle. He made exaggerated movements, clearly aware that others were watching. Some tourists whispered among themselves, while others shook their heads. The peaceful atmosphere began to feel strained. The beefeater stepped forward slightly, careful not to appear aggressive. Once again, he asked the tourist to follow the rules. His tone remained steady, his posture firm. He explained that the boundaries existed to protect the site and ensure everyone could enjoy the visit. This was not about personal authority, but shared respect. The tourist responded with a shrug, acting as if the request was not important. He joked lightly and smiled at his phone, as though the situation were part of a performance. The beefeater noticed how this behavior affected others. People nearby were no longer focused on the history around them. Their attention was drawn to the disruption. The beefeater felt the responsibility of his role more strongly now. Allowing such behavior to continue would send the wrong message. Rules only mattered if they were enforced. Still, he held on to patience. He had dealt with difficult moments before, and he knew that calm firmness often worked better than raised voices. Around them, the crowd continued to grow. Some visitors tried to ignore the situation, while others watched closely. A few quietly moved away, uncomfortable with the tension. The beefeater understood that every action he took would be noticed. He had to balance authority with respect, discipline with calm. He took a small step closer and made eye contact with the tourist. His presence alone carried weight. This time his words were more direct, though still polite. He made it clear that the behavior was not acceptable and needed to stop immediately. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. For a moment, the tourist seemed surprised. He looked around, noticing the attention he had drawn. His smile faded slightly, replaced by uncertainty. Still, instead of stepping back fully, he hesitated, as if deciding whether to comply or continue pushing boundaries. The beefeater did not rush the moment. He stood still, allowing silence to do its work. Silence, he knew, could be powerful. It forced people to reflect. The surrounding visitors watched quietly now, waiting to see what would happen next. The tourist finally lowered his phone a little, but he did not apologize or fully step back. His body language suggested resistance, not understanding. The beefeater recognized this as a turning point. He had given warnings. He had shown patience. The next step, if needed, would require action, not words. Inside, the beefeater remained calm. Training had prepared him for moments like this. He reminded himself that his role was not to win an argument, but to protect the space and the experience of everyone present. Personal feelings had no place here. The atmosphere around them had changed completely. What had once been peaceful now felt tense and uncertain. Even those far away could sense that something was wrong. The beefeater understood that how he handled the next moment would define the rest of the day. With steady breath and focused eyes, he prepared himself. The situation had reached a point where respect for the rules had to be clearly enforced. The tourist's behavior was no longer just careless. It was disrupting the shared experience of many others. The moment of decision was approaching, and the calm morning was now leading toward a critical turning point. The beefeater felt the weight of the moment settle around him. The crowd had gone quiet, and even the distant sounds of footsteps seemed softer. He stood firmly, his posture straight, his face calm. Inside, he reminded himself of the training that had shaped him over the years. Every lesson had pointed to this truth. Authority did not come from force, but from control, clarity, and purpose. He took one measured step forward, closing the distance just enough to be clearly seen and heard. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but stronger than before. It was not raised, yet it carried across the small space between them. He clearly stated that the tourist needed to step back and stop recording in that area. His words were careful, respectful, and firm. There was no room left for misunderstanding. The tourist looked at him, eyes widening slightly. For the first time since arriving, he seemed unsure. He glanced around, noticing how many people were watching now. The playful confidence he had shown earlier faded. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, as if deciding his next move. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might finally follow the instruction. His phone lowered a bit more, and his shoulders relaxed slightly. Some visitors nearby took quiet breaths of relief, hoping the situation would end peacefully. The beefeater remained still, giving space for the right choice to be made. But then the tourist laughed nervously and spoke again, his tone dismissive. He made a comment that suggested he still did not take the rules seriously. He lifted his phone again, though not as high as before, and took a small step sideways instead of backward. That small movement changed everything. The beefeater recognized it instantly. This was no longer confusion or excitement. It was refusal. Allowing it to continue would weaken the respect for the space and for his role. He did not feel anger, only clarity. The decision had been made, not emotionally, but professionally. He moved with purpose, not sudden or rough, but confident and controlled. Using clear gestures, he positioned himself between the tourist and the restricted area. His presence alone redirected the situation. He instructed the tourist to move away from the area and follow him a short distance where the issue could be resolved properly. The crowd watched closely. Some people leaned forward slightly, others held their breath. A few phones were lowered as visitors realized this was no longer entertainment, but a real moment of authority being exercised. Parents quietly guided their children to stay still and observe respectfully. The tourist hesitated again, clearly uncomfortable now. He looked around, aware of the eyes on him. His earlier confidence had completely disappeared. Slowly and without speaking, he followed the beefeater's direction. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The beefeater guided him calmly, never touching him, never raising his voice. His movements were deliberate and practiced. This was not about embarrassment or punishment. It was about restoring order. Nearby staff noticed the situation and stood alert, ready to assist if needed, but they did not interfere. The beefeater was handling it well. Once they reached a more open area, the beefeater stopped and turned to face the tourist. His expression remained neutral. He explained in simple terms why the rules existed and why they applied to everyone equally. He spoke about safety, respect, and the importance of preserving the place for future visitors. His words were not long, but they were clear. The tourist listened quietly now. His head was slightly lowered and his phone remained at his side. He did not argue this time. Whether out of understanding or discomfort, he had stopped resisting. The beefeater could see that the message had finally reached him. Around them, the atmosphere slowly began to relax. People resumed walking, talking softly again. The tension that had filled the air began to fade. A few visitors exchanged approving glances, impressed by how the situation had been handled. No shouting, no chaos. Just calm authority. The beefeater finished speaking and gave the tourist a final, clear instruction about where he could stand and what behavior was expected. He then stepped back, signaling that the matter was resolved. He did not wait for thanks or apology. That was never his goal. The tourist nodded once and quietly moved away, blending back into the crowd. He no longer stood out. His behavior had changed, and so had his energy. He kept his distance from restricted areas and stayed silent for the rest of his visit. The beefeater watched him go for a brief moment, then turned and returned to his post. As he resumed his position, the sense of balance returned. The crowd respected the space again. The sounds of the site returned to normal, calm, and steady. Inside, the beefeater felt no pride or satisfaction, only quiet resolve. This was what his role required. Moments like this were not rare, but each one mattered. Every time he acted with fairness and control, he reinforced the meaning of the uniform he wore. Visitors continued their tour, now with a deeper awareness of the place. Some whispered about what they had seen, not in excitement but in respect. The moment had left an impression. It reminded them that history was not just something to observe, but something to honor. The beefeater stood tall once more, eyes forward, breath steady. The challenge had passed, but the day was not over. He remained ready, knowing that respect, once restored, had to be maintained. The calm strength he carried was not loud or dramatic, but it was powerful enough to protect the space and the people within it. After the situation was resolved, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal. The paths filled again with gentle movement, and the low hum of conversation came back. People walked more carefully now, as if reminded that the place they were visiting was not just a tourist spot, but a living part of history. The beefeater stood at his post, calm and steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the moment had left a clear impression on everyone who witnessed it. Some visitors exchanged quiet looks of understanding. A few nodded slightly toward the beefeater, showing silent appreciation. No one clapped or spoke loudly. Respect was shown in subtle ways, slower steps, softer voices, and phones lowered out of courtesy. Parents used the moment as a quiet lesson for their children, explaining the importance of following rules in shared spaces. The beefeater noticed these changes without turning his head. He was trained to observe while appearing still. He could sense the shift in energy. Earlier, curiosity had mixed with carelessness. Now, awareness and respect filled the air. The crowd moved with more intention, careful not to cross lines or disturb the calm. A tour guide paused nearby, adjusting his tone before continuing his explanation. He spoke more softly, reminding his group that the rules were there to protect the site and everyone's experience. The visitors listened attentively, their attention deeper than before. The earlier incident had made the words feel more real. The tourist who had caused the disturbance remained in the area but kept his distance. He walked quietly now, hands at his sides, no longer seeking attention. His face showed a mix of embarrassment and reflection. He avoided eye contact with others, focusing instead on the ground ahead of him. The excitement that once drove him had faded, replaced by awareness. Other tourists noticed this change as well. No one pointed or whispered loudly. The crowd showed maturity, allowing the moment to pass without further tension. In a shared, unspoken way, everyone understood that mistakes could happen, but respect in response mattered most. The beefeater remained motionless, his presence steady and reassuring. Though he did not move or speak, his role continued. Order had been restored, not through force but through calm authority. This quiet strength left a deeper impact than any loud confrontation ever could. Time passed, and the site continued to welcome visitors. New groups arrived, unaware of what had happened earlier. Yet they too seemed to pick up on the respectful tone. Sometimes behavior is shaped not just by rules, but by the atmosphere created when those rules are upheld. A young visitor stopped near the beefeater and whispered a question to a parent, asking why he stood so still. The parent smiled gently and explained that it was part of his duty. The child nodded, eyes wide with curiosity and respect. Small moments like these reminded the beefeater why his role mattered beyond enforcement. The crowd gradually spread out and the space felt open again. Sunlight moved across the stone paths, warming the ground. The beefeater's focus remained unchanged. He did not seek praise or recognition. For him, maintaining order was enough. Some visitors took photos from a respectful distance, careful not to cross boundaries. Others simply stood and observed, appreciating the scene without capturing it. The earlier incident had quietly taught them that not every moment needed to be recorded to be remembered. The tourist who had been guided away eventually approached an information sign and read it carefully. He stayed there longer than most, absorbing the words. It was a small sign of change, but a meaningful one. The experience had turned into a lesson rather than a memory of embarrassment. Nearby, a couple discussed what they had seen, not with excitement but with thoughtfulness. They spoke about how rules protected history and how respect allowed everyone to enjoy the place equally. Their conversation reflected a deeper understanding sparked by the moment. The beefeater listened to none of this directly, yet he felt the impact. His stillness was not emptiness, it was active awareness. He remained alert, scanning the area without obvious movement, ready to respond if needed. As the afternoon progressed, the site continued to function smoothly. There were no further disruptions. Visitors moved with care, respecting signs and boundaries. The shared experience felt balanced again. The beefeater's role was often misunderstood by outsiders. Some thought it was about strictness or control. In reality, it was about balance, about guiding behavior without diminishing dignity, about protecting a space while welcoming those who came to learn. The moment earlier had shown this clearly. No harsh words were spoken. No dramatic actions were taken. Yet the message had been delivered, understood, and accepted. That was the true strength of discipline. The beefeater stood firm as shadows slowly lengthened. He felt the quiet satisfaction that came from doing his duty well, not pride but purpose. The kind that did not need acknowledgement. Around him, the sight breathed calmly again. Visitors came and went, carrying with them not just photos but a sense of respect. The lesson had spread without being announced. In this way, the incident became more than a brief disruption. It became a shared reminder that public spaces belong to everyone, that rules existed for a reason, and that respect, once shown, had the power to shape behavior far beyond a single moment. The beefeater remained at his post, steady as ever, knowing that sometimes the greatest impact came not from action, but from how action was handled. As the day moved closer to evening, the flow of visitors slowly began to thin. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the stone paths and old walls. The noise softened again, returning to a calm rhythm much like the early morning. The beefeater remained at his post, steady and composed, as he had been all day. His uniform, still neat and dignified, seemed to carry the quiet strength of tradition itself. The events of earlier no longer weighed on the space, but they were not forgotten. They lingered gently, like a lesson absorbed rather than spoken aloud. Visitors who had witnessed the moment carried it with them in their thoughts. Some reflected silently, others shared quiet words with companions. The experience had become part of their visit, shaping how they remembered the place. The tourist who had caused the disturbance earlier now stood near the exit, waiting. His posture was different from before. Gone was the restless energy and need for attention. He looked thoughtful, his gaze moving slowly across the grounds one last time. When he passed the beefeater from a respectful distance, he paused briefly. Without saying a word, he gave a small nod. It was simple but sincere. The beefeater acknowledged it with a calm glance, nothing more. No words were needed. This quiet exchange marked the true end of the incident. What began as carelessness had ended in understanding, not through embarrassment or conflict, but through calm guidance. The tourist left the grounds with a new awareness, one he had not expected to gain when the day began. The beefeater returned his focus forward. He did not dwell on the moment. In his role, reflection was brief, and duty always came first. Still, deep inside, he understood the importance of what had occurred. It was not about correcting one person's behavior. It was about protecting a shared experience and preserving respect for a place that belonged to history. As staff members began preparing for closing, the atmosphere grew peaceful. The last groups of visitors walked slowly, taking final looks and photos from appropriate distances. The site felt balanced again, as if it had quietly settled after a small disturbance. The beefeater's presence had helped restore that balance. He thought about the many people who pass through these gates every day. Each brought their own background, habits, and expectations. Not everyone understood the same rules. Not everyone arrived with the same level of awareness. His role existed because of that difference. He was there to guide, to protect, and to remind. The beefeater had learned long ago that respect could not be demanded. It had to be shown first. Through calm behavior, clear boundaries, and steady presence, respect grew naturally. That day had proven it once again. As evening approached, the light softened and the old stones seemed to glow warmly. The beefeater stood still, but his senses remained alert. Even at the quietest times, awareness mattered. Tradition did not rest, and neither did responsibility. Nearby, a young couple spoke softly about what they had seen earlier. They talked about how calm authority was more powerful than loud control. They agreed that the moment had made them appreciate the place more deeply. Their words were quiet but meaningful. The lesson continued to spread. The beefeater did not hear them, yet their reflection was part of the impact. Every visitor who left with greater respect carried a small piece of the roll forward. In this way, the beefeater's influence extended beyond the walls and into the wider world. When the final visitors exited and the gates began to close, the grounds fell into silence. The beefeater remained until his duty was complete. He felt the familiar calm that came at the end of a long day, not exhaustion but fulfillment. He had upheld the standards entrusted to him. As he finally prepared to leave his post, he took one last look at the space. The stones stood quiet and strong, unchanged by the events of the day. History remained protected, just as it had been for generations. He felt honored to be a small part of that ongoing story. Walking away, his steps were steady and unhurried. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new energy, and perhaps new challenges. But he would return with the same calm strength, ready to serve. The story of that day would not be written in official records. It would live in memory instead. In the minds of those who learned that respect matters, that tradition deserves care, and that calm authority can guide behavior without harming dignity. In the end, it was not about moving a tourist or enforcing a rule. It was about reminding everyone that shared spaces require shared responsibility. That respect is a choice, and when chosen, it creates harmony. The beefeater's role continued, quiet and firm, long after the day ended. And for those who witnessed it, the lesson stayed with them, shaping how they viewed not just that place, but the world beyond it.